The most dangerous sentence in fighting games sounds mature. Back then, it was real skill. We had better players, better games, better standards, and the moment you fully believe that, you stop adapting. Here's what's strange. The players who truly dominated back then, most of them adapted. They learned the new systems, stayed competitive, or moved on without making it a statement. It's the ones who almost made it or peaked early and stopped who can't let go. Because nostalgia doesn't just remember the past, it protects you from the present. The gatekeeping that survives every era is when you use the old era as proof that you're right, instead of proof that you need to grow. It's the easiest way to feel superior without improving. It spreads because it sounds like standards, but it's ego dressed up as history. Nostalgia starts innocent. You remember things felt simpler, less information, less noise. Maybe it was arcade culture. Maybe it was early online ranked. Maybe it was your local scene before it dissolved. Whatever it was, it felt real to you. And that feeling isn't wrong. But here's the problem. When the game changes, your brain looks for stability. The easiest source of stability is the past. So it grabs that era and says, that was real skill. And then it quietly adds, this new stuff doesn't count. And once that belief sets in, something shifts. You stop seeing new mechanics as systems to master. You start seeing them as evidence of decline. A new layer isn't something to study. It's autopilot. Modern defense isn't evolving, it's dumbed down. New players aren't learning faster with better resources, they're carried. That belief is comfortable because it means you don't have to update your identity. You don't have to accept that new systems demand new mastery. You don't have to admit that skills you spent years building might need to be rebuilt from the ground up. You don't have to face the worst possibility, that you're not losing because the era changed. You're losing because you didn't. And to be clear, playing older games isn't the problem. Preferring older systems isn't the problem. The problem is when you use preference to avoid improvement or to attack people who made different choices. You can love Street Fighter 3 Third Strike and never touch modern games. You can grind Street Fighter 6 and never touch legacy games. But the moment you say modern players aren't real while refusing to compete in the modern game, or legacy players are outdated while never learning what made their era hard, that's when preference becomes deflection. The game you play doesn't matter. What matters is whether you're using comparison as a substitute for competition. There's another version of the same pattern that hides behind game design. Some people speak from authority like they're the ones who decide what's right and wrong in design. They don't just say, I prefer this, they speak like they're writing the law. And they use the past as a lever to control the future. This is what the game should be. This is what real design is. This is what the developers must return to. And listen, it's fine to want something to stay the same. It's fine to miss an older foundation. But if the game changes, it changed. At that point, you only have two honest options. Adapt to what exists or go play something that matches what you want. Because your preference isn't a verdict, it's a preference. And yes, sometimes games change the foundation. Other times they keep the foundation and just add layers on top. Both are real, but either way, reality is reality. You don't get to debate a patch into disappearing. Nostalgia isn't only personal, it becomes social. A way to rank people without playing them. And it works both directions. Old school players use back then to dismiss modern competition. Modern players use outdated to dismiss legacy achievement. Both are doing the same thing. Use an era as a shortcut to avoid proving anything today. And yes, modern players gatekeep too. They just dress it up as progress. Here's what that looks like in real time. There are modern players who don't just enjoy the current era, they invalidate the past to make themselves look bigger. They don't say, this is my moment. They say, that era didn't count. Not because they studied it, not because they tested it, but because if the past was fake, then their present becomes proof. And here's how they do it. They pick apart game design, they find one mechanic they don't like and use it to erase entire eras of competition. That game had X mechanics so wins didn't matter. That game was broken so the results don't count. It's the same move old school players make, just in reverse. Old school players say modern games are too easy. Modern players say old games were too broken. Both use design as a weapon to avoid one simple fact. Someone was better than them in that system. And discrediting the system is easier than admitting that. And discrediting the system is easier than just admitting that. That's not confidence, that's a shortcut. Because when you can't stand on results alone, you start rewriting what results used to mean. Now, to be clear, a lot of people are innocent. They're not posturing, they're not disrespecting anyone, they're just enjoying what they enjoy. And that's healthy. That's not the problem though. The problem is when someone uses their error as a weapon, not to celebrate what they're doing, but to discredit what someone else did. Winning now doesn't require erasing then. And you see another version of this explode in certain long-running legacy fighters. People will call it respecting legacy, but what they're really asking for is to keep every inch of bloat intact, every obscure interaction, because that clutter created leverage. For a long time it worked, not because it was deeper, because it was harder to access. When learning tools were weak, knowledge itself became a gate. Then the tools get better, training gets clearer, learning gets faster, people can lab answers instead of guessing, and suddenly the same players start calling the game dumbed down. Not because competition got weaker, but because private advantages started disappearing. So when developers reduced the noise and clarified the intention behind movesets to push players toward the essentials faster, the same crowd complained again. And if you've been around long enough, you'll notice the pattern. They complained about the last game, the game before that, and the one before that. At a certain point, you realize something. Some people don't want the perfect version of the game. They want the version where they had the most leverage. That's not design criticism, that's nostalgia protecting status. Now flip back to the old school weapon, you see the same pattern show up. The historian. They speak in back then stories like it's credential, not context, but authority. Then you got the gatekeeper. They decide who's legit based on what era you came from. If you didn't come up their way, your wins have an asterisk next to them. So it's like, well, if you didn't do it like this, then you know that. And the revisionist. When results don't match the story becomes untouchable. And here's the ugliest part. Some of them are exaggerating. They'll tell you about their accomplishments back in the day with no footage, brackets, or records. But if you ask for proof, you're disrespecting history. When it can't be tested, the past becomes a costume anyone can wear. And that poisons communities. New players inherit shame from an era they had no part in, and the cycle continues. Here's what nostalgia does to your actual gameplay. It makes you practice the wrong problems. You train for a version of the game that no longer exists. Your practice time is high, but your improvement is zero. Because you're optimizing for a game that isn't being played. It makes you judge instead of test. You decide what's real skill before you learn the new rules. You lose to the same situation repeatedly and call it random instead of learning what it's teaching you. That's not analysis, that's protection. And it makes you avoid discomfort. Because discomfort threatens the identities nostalgia protects. So you spectate, you commentate, you criticize, but you don't lab, you don't enter, you don't test, you stop being a competitor, you become a commentator on your own decline. Not because you lost talent, but because you traded adaptation for explanation. See, I'm happy we can get online now and have an almost endless amount of people to play in multiple games. Matches don't get boring. We basically have a 24/7 arcade. And that should be the best thing that ever happened to competitors, but it exposed something ugly. A lot of people don't hate the game, they hate losing. They don't want to play unless they're at the top of the food chain. So instead of adapting, they protect their ego and call it standards. You didn't retire, you just switched from competing to narrating because narrating is safer. This isn't a mechanics argument, it's an identity argument. Some players can't accept being a beginner again. If you spent years mastering something, if you built a reputation, if people know you as that guy, starting over feels like erasing all of that. So you build a story where the world is wrong so you can stay right. And sometimes the criticisms are valid, but when you use them as a reason to stop competing, when you use them as a shield against ever being wrong again, that's not criticism, that's protection. If you want to break the pattern, ask these 3 questions every time you think back then. First, what is the game rewarding right now? Not what you wish it rewarded, not what older games rewarded, right now. Sit down with the current patch reality, watch top 8 from the most recent major. What keeps working that you keep calling cheap? Write it down, test it, stop theorizing. Second, what part of my identity is threatened by this meta? If you feel angry, dismissed, or above it, that's the signal. Ask yourself, if I learned this and got good at it, would I feel like I betrayed something? If the answer is yes, that's the signal. Your ego is attached to a version of skill the game no longer rewards. And until you let that go, you can't move forward. Third, what is the smallest experiment I can run today? Not a speech, not a debate, a test. One session where you commit to the current rules and gather evidence. If you think something is brain dead, spend one session using it. See where it gets checked, see where it works, see where the counterplay really is. You're not trying to prove it's good or bad, you're trying to understand it, because the cure for nostalgia is not arguing online. The cure is adaptation. And adaptation starts with curiosity, not conclusions. Stop asking, is this real skill? And start asking, what does this game want me to learn? That question will take you further than any era or debate ever will. The past can inspire you. It can remind you why you fell in love with this in the first place, but if you use it as a weapon, it becomes a cage. And the cage is comfortable right up until you realize you've been trapped inside it for years. If your best win is a story, you're already losing. But here's the good news. You can get out, not by arguing, not by proving the past mattered, by showing up in the present, by running the experiment, by learning the system, by competing. If you want the fastest way to stop losing for reasons you can't explain, I made a tool that takes 60 seconds. Get the 60-second checklist for free. The link is on the screen and pinned in the comments. Use it after a loss and it will tell you exactly what category you're failing in. Then you fix the right thing, not the story.